Welcome, Summoners, to Vision Denial. My name is Sam, and this week, the LPL seems to be scarier than ever. You can really feel the investigation of win trading in the VCS a lot. Drafts from 14.6 look more creative than ever, and more on this week's Road to MSI. Let's get started. Starting with, if you've been following the LPL within this first three rounds, including to this fourth round now, you will have noticed a trend of upwards skill, where most of the time they look pretty on par with many of the other regions that would be competing, from the LCK to the LCS and many of the smaller regions. It looked business as usual, a little cleaner, a little snappier, but still some of the same kind of usual mistakes and expected trends within drafting. Up until we got into round 3, and especially within round 4, where the LPL looked scarier than ever, especially BD gaming. I personally, I'm going to put it out there, think that at least MSI is very LPL heavy favorites for this year. Mostly from the angle of the creative approach to the drafting phase, especially within 14.6, which is what both the LCK and the LPL are working with. And quite honestly, I've seen a lot more fun out of the drafting phase from the LPL, while the LCK seems to be a little bit more business as usual, slow to adopt, so on and so forth. So, for the moment in time being, up until I see further from most of the places, this is where we're going to be at. The LPL seems to be my favorite for this year. You let me know what you think. Next, speaking of, the drafting phase do genuinely look a lot more fun. There seems to be a lot more creativity with Diana coming in as more of a flexible pick between jungle and mid lane. Brand jungle all of a sudden. The upward trends of literally you can put Rumble anywhere. The sky's the limit in terms of the approaches of which drafting phase from the position of 14.6 has given us. And it gives me a huge amount of joy to see it during playoffs, because it means that there's more likely of a chance for teams to just kind of get super creative, like beyond what we could actually think of currently. That said, we should temper our expectations because we still have the limits of what the bot lane can do in terms of meta. That'll always be a little damper on things. That, and so long as Smolder's state stays as is, we'll see where it goes. Next, we have to talk about the VCS. They got their chance to start their playoffs at this particular time. The first two best of fives of the 4 best of fives that they have, because they've gotten their 10-4 because of the whole events. If you've not seen it, or if you've not heard about it, look at the last video. I'll keep in the link below the entire investigation timeline regarding it. But you can really feel the change in staffing and approach from each of these teams from the loss of players during the win trading. Many of them are a little bit more trepidatious or overly ambitious, with very few of them actually cleaning up their play. So it becomes super unfortunate that the team that's going to be going and representing is not going to come in with the full force of the evaluation that the VCS would have wanted, let alone how the roster usually interacts for their preparation. And it's kind of unfortunate. Lastly, we're going to go over the playoffs that I reviewed. I apologize if last week I didn't get anything up online. Unfortunately, there was a lot of stuff that came up that required me to, 1, not review as many playoffs as I would have wanted, but 2, also not have as much prepared for this week in terms of a video. So that said, we're going to be going over the remainder of March 31st. So those would be the OMG versus WE up until the finals of the LCS, all the way till April 5th, or up until April 6th with the first two series of there, which was Gen G versus Humble Life and BD Gaming versus Ninjas in Pajamas. If you follow me on TikTok, you'll know, but if you don't, I post all of these as live once I've gotten to watch them in order. There's only so much I can watch as they happen, so I will regularly just be behind. But if you want to see my thoughts as they are going on, I'll have the link of the TikTok down below also. So without further ado, let's take a look at these best of fives. Control and coordination are the key words of this series. OMG kept trying to draft and execute compositions that required full control of the early game, non-stop pressure, and the coordination to match the late game skirmishes that they'd be facing. But instead, we saw a very passive team, unable to recognize their playstyle needs to adjust, or just any new draft type at all. Which is unfortunate because some of their neutral setups and overall coordination is fairly nice. But World Elite called them out on this particular lack of understanding of their own playstyle. Speaking of, specifically, World Elite played some of the best vision game I have ever seen so far in 2024. Some full denial and complete control to actually pull off Secret Baron takes, full map movements faster than one can react, flank positions, and max effectiveness for all of their particular draft needs. Now, I am concerned about the inconsistent coordination in some of these skirmishes that they showed us, but the vision play is so good it could help up to a point. My MVP of this series is Iwandi for the space given in the skirmishes, but really it's mostly for the vision play. This was round 1 of the LPL in the non-elimination bracket, OMG versus Team World Elite. Incredibly one-sided in ways that mattered. Red Canids found themselves lost with poor drafts, reads of any kinds, worse execution within those particular drafts, inconsistent neutral plays, and plenty of desperation to share. They had a fantastic vision play and moments of brilliance when it came to a few skirmishes, but overall, much of what was seen is a poor understanding of the state of the game, or at least when it came to facing Loud. Now, this was a Loud who still managed to pull off a variety of drafts pretty excellently, while upkeeping incredible vision, especially when it came to vision denial, solid macro options, overall excellent coordination. I do have some concerns with Loud's inability to balloon gold leads, waiting far too long to push things along, and sometimes overcommitting themselves or waiting for moments that just do not exist when they could have, forced errors out. As this was a fairly clean series from them that hasn't given me quite yet the full confidence at an international play yet. This was round 2 of the CBLOL upper bracket, Red Canids Kulunga versus Loud. Both of these teams will represent the LCS at MSI, and honestly, this should be a great time. FlyQuest showed still some solid coordination, great vision play, and adaptation well suited for international play. I think that their overall macro play needs some polishing, as the regular hesitation that we see from them, as side lanes are being pressured and objectives are being contested, is just not a great sight. Speaking of, Team Liquid show a side of them that continues to be a delight. The aggression and proactivity mixed with the macro that we are accustomed to is already fantastic. But the thing that makes it so nice from them is that we no longer have a Team Liquid plagued by being unable to close out games. We do, however, have micro choices that cause some issues occasionally, but they aren't as frequent as you'd expect from such bloody teams. Overall, I'm pretty content with the teams going to represent the LCS at MSI. It's just a matter of seeing if it's enough for the title. My MVP for the series is Impact, who continues to be a nuisance to everyone from team fight to sidelines to small skirmishes. He is everyone's problems. This was not only a rematch, but the grand finals of the LCS FlyQuest versus Team Liquid Honda. Honestly, neither of these teams are ready for the international stage. Invictus Gaming hold some of the wildest drafts with the confidence of a team who think they can emulate champions facing down a lower seed as the lowest seed of the LPL. Bold. Now, they do apply solid vision play and decent coordination, but with drafts and proactivity that just make everything harder, it's easy to see why they lost. But also, they almost won? As Weibo Gaming really need to just get their act together. Overall better vision play, drafting, neutral setups, like all the kit and caboodle, much better. But they twiddle their thumbs as if their opponents don't also scale or attempt to shut them down. The hesitation and lack of decisiveness left a really bad taste in my mouth when watching this series. Ugh. Makes it hard for me to see them even make it through to the next round. My MVP of this series is Light for being the most consistent player on this squad. This was round 1 of the LPL, Invictus Gaming versus Weibo Game. The series is close in some of the most lopsided ways. It's so unfortunate to see WE go because this was by far the best vision team I have ever seen. Not only in terms of placing and denying vision, but also from their ability to pull teams apart with the macro choices enabled by said vision play. But their inconsistent early gameplay, coupled with an inability to bloom gold or other leads, relying primarily on objectives and global control, means that any flips will do the trick to stop them. Ninjas, on the other hand, for their part, are the most disappointing winners of a series I've seen for a while. They play incredibly in the early game, fantastic coordination, and frankly, balloon leads fantastically, once at least the leads have been established. I understand their 5th seed in this particular situation, but equally, being unable to play from behind or close out games nicely leaves me with very little confidence in their ability to play internationally. Just how many coin flips do we need to win a series? Jeez. My MVP for the series is Rookie, who was the most consistent and impactful player of his squad. Both of these teams need to reevaluate their approach to closing out games. D+, as an early game team, hold incredible vision, clear understanding of their win conditions, balloon leads excellently, and create an absurd amount of pressure. While some of their micro and macro choices are slower than Light, it's never really delaying the game, just slower than just what we would prefer. Now, Gen G follows similarly, but oftentimes a lot cleaner and sharper as a squad overall, making them usually the better early game team that closes out games. The big thing, however, that both of these teams struggle immensely in the series is how they close out games. D+, with the hesitation and slow push towards these wins, leads them to be very open to comebacks from their opponents, while Gen G holds the opposite issue, while they just kind of overforce and overcommit, leading to moments that are so strongly in their control to just slip away. Now, hopefully, both teams correct before their next series, but we'll see. My MVP for this series is Chovy for how much he controlled skirmishes in each game. This was round 2 of the LCK in the upper bracket, Gen G versus D+ Kia. I'm very surprised at the result of this game. The Flying Oysters, for their part, do play better than this, quite honestly. In fact, they show it in this series. Superb coordination, fantastic neutral setups, solid vision play, and some fairly decent adaptation. But none of it mattered when there is zero proactivity or aggression. I would wait for the Flying Oysters to do something all game, all series, and it would only happen as an answer to a play or when defense is all that is left to do before losing a game. I hope this changes for the next split. All the while, the Hawks keep surprising me on how they keep getting these wins. The gradual improvement in their early game, coordination, drafting choices, all in all is excellent. Now, I still find that ballooning leads and closing out games is still not quite there for the Hawks, as they have some of the slowest paced games to boot. My MVP of the series is Dasher, whose skirmishing power shaped the field to their victory. This was the lower bracket finals of the PCS CTBC Flying Oysters versus the LJL's Fukuoka SoftBank Hawks Gaming. I'm very baffled by the way that LNG chose to play today. Because on paper, their vision, coordination, macro choices, and neutral approach, all of it solid. But they draft in ways that require a type of aggression we almost never see from them in this entire series. Hold very little adaptation within those drafts that would encourage their playstyle, and then sometimes it works because they hit the game state needed for a split second and out team fight, which is not particularly strong as a recipe for success. It is very coin flippy. Meanwhile, Weibo properly adapt to play vision denial very excellently, have some strong sense of coordination. The issue usually lies in how they overcommit both as a squad and individually, hindering what is otherwise an incredible run so far. My MVP for this series is Xiaohao for how well he enabled the early game and shut down the win conditions from LNG. This was round 2 of the LPL, LNG Esports versus Weibo Gaming. T1 just wasn't properly prepared. We see, for the first time in a long time, a T1 that was punished for their poor and bizarre drafting choices, actively working against their playstyle, which includes fantastic vision, solid neutral setups, and a strong late game macro play. All under heavy early game leads they would just never push. That's to say that Homo Life did take the route to fully counter and punish the game plan that T1 ran with in this series, absorbing the early game pressure enough to scale and push back on a squad that did not have enough resources to justify the choices they made. The coordination, vision, and macro plays are out of this world from Homo Life, who are showing some incredible signs as a squad for international play. Now it just comes down to consistency for individual players and their positioning that regularly push back against their ability to snowball as well as they have consistently. My MVP for this series goes to Delight, who was an absolute monster controlling every skirmish. This was round 2 in the upper bracket of the LCK, T1 versus Homo Life Esports. Very awkward pacing all around in this series. Now, FunPlus showed us some moments of brilliance and coordination around neutrals and especially around to punish NIP's play, but rarely played proactively across the series, which is a shame because their adaptation from game to game is well reflected in their draft. All of it had glimmers of hope for their success between the vision play, the neutral objectives, all of it. But Ninjas in Pajamas was just faster, more proactive, better coordinated overall. Coupling that with their incredible vision play and neutral setups, we have what is a really scary team, at least from this series. And I really want to see more. I do have some concerns overall regarding some of the micro choices that we saw out of Ninjas from at least some of the players getting caught out in some silly ways, but overall this was an excellent series and play that needs a little bit cleanup, especially in regards to their pacing. My MVP of this series is Aki for how much of the early game he established for his squad. This was round 3 of the LPL, Fun Plus Phoenix versus Ninjas in Pajamas. They looked so Weibo have shown us incredible control, coordination, vision play, rotation across the play. This series is no different, but the actual pressure and tempo was just not there, let alone any ability to leads when. I say this because JD Gaming just controlled them in every aspect. Side lane approaches, their neutral setups, their win conditions overall within the drafts, all while actually approaching their own incredibly. JD Gaming don't balloon leads necessarily any better than what Weibo do, but the control of the game is much better. Again, the aspect that sells it to me for sure that this is an strong contender for international play. They matched the energy and gameplay of Weibo and amplified it where it needed, clean, calculated fashion. of this series is Flandre, who outplayed the entirety. This was round 3 of Yell, Weibo Gaming versus JD. Team Wells only tried in moments of desperation. Frequently, seeing a team draft a composition that required aggression and priority over neutral objectives is a little frustrating when those aren't applied. Now, on the one hand, yes, their coordination is excellent, their vision play is mostly solid, and the drafts themselves are pretty good. But they are frequently playing the game slower than the needs of their draft, causing a myriad of issues. Not to mention, some of the macro and micro choices do not help their cases. While GAM, for their part, are consistently first to all plays. Drake, already there. Grubs, 22 of the 24 of theirs. Baron, blinked and you missed it. Team Well's very own plans, GAM have already anticipated and were prepared for it first before they arrived. My main concern from GAM is that their coordination is not consistent enough. Individually, these players are really solid, but too often a skirmish would be initiated by them without the full team responding and following up in sync. Especially with leads where that should never have been a problem to begin with. Now, this usually isn't a problem given how fast they play, but oh boy does it look bad when it does. My MVP for this series is Levy. If you drop 5 bans on a jungler in Game 4, he must be doing something right with the pressure he applies. This was round 1 of the VCS. Team Wales versus GAM Esports.
I'm honestly genuinely pleased by this performance. Now, Team Secret held some solid coordination, a good understanding of their win conditions, some pretty creative early game approaches to their skirmishing. Now that said, the combination of poor adaptation from game to game, very lackluster vision play, and a very one-note approach to macro choices, Team Secret just don't strike me as a team that would succeed on an international stage. Viking Esports, for their part, don't fare better when it comes to vision or macro setups, which is not a good sign for their chances on an international stage either, but their adaptation from game to game, coordination, and overall flexibility are. Couple that with a clear understanding of neutral setups and how to balloon leads, I was genuinely surprised to see how well this squad worked to close out games before it became harder than needed to. My MVP for this series is Katsi, whose constant aggression really messed with Team Secret. This was the upper bracket round 2 of the VCS, Team Secret versus Viking Esports. Not the cleanest of sweeps. Now, Kaboom did a lot to slow down games, upkeep vision, and really understand Red Cannon's win conditions, at least to nullify them to the best of their abilities. But there were a lot more reactive, slow to neutrals, or any plays for that matter. And anytime they showed some proactivity, it was very haphazard. They really extended some games, but it was clear that it was mostly a sinking ship for them. Now, the Red Cannons, for their part, played a very proactive game, incredible dives, especially the dives, solid understanding of where to apply their win conditions, and some decent vision control. Their vision denial needs some work, and a lot of the time the individual players would overstep, causing just a lot more of the game to slow down even more, not to mention some lackluster game-closing attempts. The Red Cannons need some polish, but from the series it's clear that they almost have what it's needed for an international stage. My MVP for the series is Bronze for how well he played out of just every single skirmish and dive. This was round 2 of the lower bracket of the CBLOL, Kaboom Esports versus Red Cannons Kalunga. Congrats to Gen G on being the 4th team to qualify for MSI. Home on Life held such solid approaches to this series, from incredible vision, solid coordination, good adaptation from game to game, and frankly, some of the best reads for neutral plays. I was bothered by how how they limited themselves, from very passive play, lack of proactivity, inconsistent attempts at ballooning or pushing leads, and frankly, just misreading how Gen G would answer any of their plays. Now, Gen G, for their part, showed some of the messiest games I've seen from them in terms of regional play in a long time. Their vision, neutral setups, micro choices, and even their coordination was just kind of a little all over the place.
They do play cleaner, but frankly, it just wasn't there this series. If it wasn't for Joey absolutely playing out of his mind, I think the series would be very different in terms of the results. But you couple his play with that and Gen G's ability to understand how to close out games and play towards their win conditions allowed them to this particular slot to MSI. My MVP for the series is Chovy. I mean, honestly, people should just not let him play his year. This was the LCK's upper bracket finals, Humble Life Esports versus Gen G. A game of vision and neutrals. The Ninjas continued a solid early game trend of control through vision and neutral setups. Some solid coordination is present, some good adaptation from game to game, and quite frankly, they're just a solid team. While some small micro and macro choices weren't fantastic, much of their play was serviceable. This is a good team, which is an issue when facing off against Bitty Bitty, because holy shit, Bitty Bitty are back in force and even scarier than last year. The neutral setups alone have me in awe, let alone their skirmishing and coordination and such solid drafting choices. They haven't sealed it yet, but it wouldn't surprise me if they get one of the 2 slots for the LPL. That said, there are some moments that leave me perplexed from some individual players, micro choices that slow the game or just make them lose harder this particular game from behind. But overall, this team remains terrifying from how they even adapt from the mistakes they've made. My MVP for this series is Knight for how much pressure he applied during these skirmishes. This was round 4 of the LPL in the upper bracket, Ninjas in Pajamas versus Bitty Bitty Gaming. Well, those are a huge variety in terms of like the quality of these series. Just as a frank honesty, I do want to put in at least my observations of what seems to be the trending gameplay variety. It is less and less about the actual laning phase and more about how aggressively and proactively your neutral objectives go. Now, you could say, well, Sam, this has always been the case. Sure. But the meta and the ebb and flow of League of Legends over the years changes from laning pressure to neutral objectives to vision to side laning throughout the mid to late game, where like the importance of either the early game or the mid game or the late game really changes and drastically goes over when metas change from season to season. And as it happens, early game oriented drafts with the aim and purpose not to siege, as that seems to be inconsequential even with the grubs themselves, but with the aim of regularly and consistently pushing for advantages is the go-to, just as what seems to be the straight for it. Whilst other seasons ignoring neutral objectives with the aim of just being better out at team fighting and pressuring side lanes without the assistance of what is the double Herald or any of the side lanes. If you were able to get as many plays as possible, and Herald was literally the only neutral objective you went for, you could give up 3 Drakes before the time that you've gotten to a point where you can stop them from getting soul. This is not the case anymore. If you give up too many Drakes, you will lose. Just point blank. You lose control of the map outright. But that seems to be the direction that the meta for MSI is going. I would love to hear your thoughts in the comments down below. All in all, this has so far been a pretty fantastic spring playoffs. I'm usually pretty trepidatious about the actual quality of the playoffs when it comes to spring because, let's be frank, many teams don't actually put their effort into it. But with the change in the format for MSI and prize of the winner themselves being able to give auto-slated into Worlds, with the caveat if they make it into playoffs, which we'll see how I feel about that then, gives me the sense that feels like there's more at stake with getting there, and the teams are treating it as such, which is nice. It's a bigger contrast to previous years, or to many of the previous years regarding being able to make it to the tournament, where before it was just an honor and an ability to see if your team can improve and bring some ideas from other regions to your region of choice. Now it seems like it's a lot more about the next step into guaranteeing you can get to Worlds, the tournament that matters. But those are my thoughts. I would love to hear yours in the comments down below. And again, thank you all for watching. I greatly appreciate it. Again, apologies for not being able to upload last week for those who do watch. I had a lot more going on, and it took my attention away. But the next 3 weeks should be fine before MSI starts, including a overview video of all of the teams that have qualified. With that, I hope you have a wonderful rest of your week. I'll see you next time.